Good morning, everyone. I have moved this. We all have memories. We have memories that connected us with food and how food connected us with others. So I'd like to start my session a little bit different this time. I'd like everyone to close your eyes. And I'm serious, close your eyes. And let's think of a time where you first got in contact with food. You picked a fresh fruit from the ground and you tasted it. A loved one prepared a meal for you, a special meal. You enjoyed this meal, the smells, the preparation together, the chats over the table. Or think about a time where you ate your favorite dish for the very first time. Remember that explosion of flavors, that joy that this food gave you. Or remember when you gathered around the table in celebration, with family, with friends, chatting, catching up, bringing out old memories. Remember that feeling. Again, remember the joy. Now you can open your eyes again. So when I did this exercise for the first time, I closed my eyes and the feeling of joy, the feeling of celebration, the feeling of belonging as well, and the feeling of safe space, of home. I am originally from Poland, and when I was very young, I had the chance to leave my country, which was under a communist regime. And ever since, I lived in 15 countries. So imagine the conflict I had inside of me. Who am I? Where do I belong? And when you're young, you just want to belong. And eventually, I realized that I am what I eat. And I have no idea what the Germans eat for Christmas, the Americans for Easter, what the Swiss do during celebrations. But I know all of the ingredients of the Polish dishes my mom prepared. I know the 12 dishes that we religiously prepared for Christmas. And I know which songs we sang with it. So I found my identity and my culture through food. And the relationship that we have with food is probably the most intimate relationship you'll ever have. Because you put something in your body, and it literally becomes you. So it's a very emotional relationship as well. And probably some of you going down memory lane and these experiences with food have felt that as well. It's linked to a lot of our memories. And a lot of people find themselves through food. There are a lot of stories like mine. And this is a very nice illustration that Greg Siegel actually did. It illustrates kids around the world with the food that they eat in their cultures and in their countries. Them as well, they identify themselves through the food that they eat. And it's a very important and very powerful illustration to me. And food plays a central role in all our lives. I think everyone here in this room eats and gathers around the table, hopefully up to 3 times a day, and we exchange memories, exchange experiences. But many of us don't realize the power of this simple act of eating and cooking. For me, food is the most powerful tool to change the world. And I'd like to encourage everyone that we build tables and not walls together. So food, as we already saw, is much more than the sum of the calories that we put into our bodies. And at the social gastronomy movement that I'm representing today as well, we work with 3 layers. It starts with food and myself, food and, this is too early, food and society, and then food and the impact on the planet. So it really starts with food and myself, even having access to food. Having food on the table, the basic need for food, it has to be a human right. So this brings human dignity. It's just, if I say I am what I eat, what am I if I don't eat? What am I if I eat someone else's trash? So also on food and myself, it's health. It's access to good food, food that can be our medicine. We can see that traditionally, but also nowadays, food is medicine. And then food and society. It's culture, identity, pride and belonging. A lot of refugees that have left everything behind, the only thing that they hold on to are their memories, and a lot of links to food. And the way that they integrate is as well sharing these traditions, sharing these recipes in their food. And with every piece of food that they share a piece of themselves, a piece of their home. With food and society, it's also status. It represents our social economic integration and our choices about food. Often status is represented with abundance on the table, which then often turns into waste. But it also means access to equal opportunities and to education. And then there is the level of consciousness, making our choices, the choices that have an impact on the planet, on the environment. The way that we think about where does my food come from? Where does my food go? 40% of all of our food is wasted. So am I going to choose the ugly fruit versus its pretty brother so that it avoids going to trash? Do I eat meat? It's one of the biggest contributors to climate change. Do I eat organic? So all these questions are around our consciousness of choices. But all of these I'd like to illustrate based on a story. And for that, we're going to go all the way to Brazil. And this is Fabrício. Fabrício is from the south of Brazil. He was middle class, and there was a shifting point in his life. Fabrício was engaged to the love of his life, and they had a fight. And she, in agony, ran over the street and was hit by a bus. Within split seconds, Fabrício's life was turned around. He was overrun by sadness, by guilt. He didn't know what to do, so he ran off. He arrived in Rio, left Curitiba, and he got robbed. Not once, but twice. He lost everything he had. And worst of it, he lost his dignity, he lost his self-worth, and he was too embarrassed to ask for help. So he ended up in our restaurant school, which is called Gastromotiva. We built it together with Food for Soul. We serve food made out of food surplus, so rescue food, and our cooks and chefs, they transform it into beautiful dishes every night. And at Gastromotiva, we don't just serve food, but we celebrate. We celebrate life, we celebrate food every night. And our guests are all homeless, refugees, people that don't have access to food. So Fabrício ended up in Refeitório. He came, he sat down, he was served by volunteers, feeling human again. People come in with their shoulders lowered, with looking down on the floor, feeling inhuman, invisible. And out of a sudden, they build this up again, and they lift their spirit. They feel human again, they feel dignity. And this is exactly what happened to Fabrício. And I underestimated this simple act of serving and having this food. So that's why I'm saying you are what you eat. So Fabrício regained confidence, and Fabrício applied to one of our culinary courses that are all free for people that want a hand up to find access. And he was educated as a chef. And then we have a network of restaurants that employ them. So Fabrício eventually went, graduated, he transformed his life, and then moved on to the next layer of having opportunities. He chose to work in an organic restaurant, and I recall the moment when he came back with his key, excited, because he said, I have a home again. Eventually, he rebuilt his confidence and went back to Curitiba to confront his family. There are millions of stories like Fabrício's. A lot of refugees, Anas, that nowadays is an entrepreneur, sharing his recipes from Syria. And he delivers to the best restaurants and the best homes a piece of his heart, a piece of his home again. But anyway, I'm not going to go into the stories. I think that illustrated a bit the different layers of these levels of our relationship with food. And beyond being from Gastromotiva, the social organization that's in Latin America mainly, I represent a social gastronomy movement. It's a network of social entrepreneurs that all work with this powerful tool of food. And we address many different issues. And I do have a little video with a message from our network around the world that should be a good reminder.
Have you ever spent one day without eating?
Can you imagine this world for one day, and for one day only, when the rich 1% live the lives of 80% poor that are marginalized and living on this planet today?
Imagine you're a kid and you didn't have a meal all day. How can you really learn something?
Have you ever thought of what it's like to wake up in the middle of the night, forced out of your home with only the clothes on your back, forced to walk hundreds of miles with only what you have on you, and wound up in a refugee camp? That's what the world is like for 65 million people.
If you were starving, if you didn't know where your next meal was coming from, and every day you woke up and you were hungry, your kids were hungry, and everyone in your family was hungry, and somebody came to you and told you that the only way that you were able to get food was to kill somebody, would you do it?
So the big question to me is, how did we get here?
It's a human right to have good food. Passion of all the individuals will come together. That's amazing.
Have you ever thought of changing the world? Start changing yourself. Look who is around you, and look how food can become disconnected.
So it's all about choices. What do we do with this act of eating and cooking? And I think after this session, I'd like everyone to reflect a little bit. What are your choices? What are you going to do? So I chose to use food to work for humanity. I chose to give opportunities, have food for people in need. I chose to help others make choices. And so my question to you is, what will be your choice? Who are you going to be through the simple act of eating? How does food define you? And so with that, I'd like to thank you all for your attention, and go join the social gastronomy movement, help your community. It's the simple acts that will change the world one dish at a time. Thank you.